The gunshot shattered the quiet of the harbor before anyone understood who had pulled the trigger, and Daniel Mercer realized with a cold shock that the man collapsing onto the rain-slick concrete was his own brother. For a moment, the world seemed to pause around him. The foghorn from the distant shipping channel groaned through the mist. Gulls scattered into the gray sky, and the smell of diesel drifted over the empty docks. Daniel stared at the spreading darkness beneath Aaron's chest. Blood moved slowly through the rainwater, twisting toward the drain near the edge of Pier 12. "Aaron," Daniel said, but the word barely left his mouth. Across the dock, a figure in a black coat lowered a pistol. Daniel could not see the face clearly, only the outline of someone who had waited patiently for this moment. Aaron tried to speak, his lips trembled. "You shouldn't have come," he whispered. Daniel dropped to his knees beside him. The rain soaked through his jacket, but he barely felt it. "Who did this?" Daniel demanded. Aaron's eyes flicked past Daniel's shoulder toward the retreating silhouette. "Too late," Aaron said. "It was always going to happen." The figure turned and disappeared into the fog between the cargo containers. Daniel looked back down. Aaron's breathing was shallow now. The sound was wet and fragile. "Stay with me," Daniel said. "We'll get you to a hospital." Aaron gave a weak smile. "You still think things can be fixed?" His hand gripped Daniel's sleeve. "Listen to me. You can't trust." The rest of the sentence never came. Aaron's body relaxed in Daniel's arms. The harbor lights flickered through the mist as sirens began somewhere far away. Daniel remained there long after the footsteps, and the gunshot faded into memory, holding the weight of his brother's stillness, while the rain washed the blood toward the sea. 3 hours later, Detective Laura Kim stood beneath a flickering fluorescent light in the precinct interview room, while Daniel sat across from her with wet hair and hollow eyes. The room smelled of stale coffee and paper dust. Laura studied the man in front of her. "You're telling me," she said slowly, "that you saw the shooter but can't describe them." Daniel rubbed his temples. "Fog. Hood. I don't know." "Your brother had enemies," Laura said. "Financial Crimes Division has been watching his company for months." Daniel looked up sharply. "Aaron ran a logistics firm." "Aaron ran several things," Laura replied. She slid a folder across the table. Inside were surveillance photos. Aaron speaking to men Daniel did not recognize. Late-night meetings. Warehouse deliveries that never appeared in official records. Daniel stared at the images. Something tight twisted inside his chest. "This is wrong," he said. Laura leaned forward. "Your brother moved a lot of money through shell companies. Some of it connects to organized smuggling networks." Daniel shook his head. "You don't understand him." "Then help me understand," Laura said quietly. "Why was he meeting you at a deserted dock in the middle of the night?" Daniel hesitated. His mind replayed the phone call Aaron had made earlier that evening. The urgency in his voice, the strange fear. "He said he needed to show me something," Daniel answered. "Documents. Proof of something big." "Where are they?" Laura asked. Daniel's silence filled the room, because the truth was he had no idea. Aaron had arrived empty-handed, or perhaps the shooter had taken them. Laura watched the conflict behind Daniel's eyes. She had seen it many times before. The moment when grief begins to compete with doubt. "Mr. Mercer," she said gently, "people don't usually get executed on docks unless they're involved in something dangerous." Daniel's jaw tightened. Aaron wasn't a criminal. Laura closed the folder. Maybe not at the beginning. Across the city, in a quiet apartment overlooking the river, a woman named Elena Vargas watched the news coverage of the harbor murder, while her fingers trembled around a glass of untouched wine. The television displayed a blurred image of police tape fluttering in the wind. The reporter spoke in urgent tones about a suspected gang killing. Elena muted the sound. Her eyes lingered on the photograph of Aaron Mercer that appeared on the screen. "You promised you would walk away," she whispered to the empty room. Her phone buzzed on the table. One message, unknown number. It contained only 4 words. "It's already in motion." Elena closed her eyes. For months she had tried to believe Aaron when he said he could dismantle the network from the inside, that he could gather enough evidence to expose everyone involved, that no one would get hurt. Now Aaron was dead, and the people behind the operation would be scrambling to secure their secrets, which meant Daniel Mercer was now a liability. Elena stood abruptly and walked to the window. Rain blurred the city lights below. She knew what the message meant. Someone inside the organization believed Aaron had already passed the evidence to his brother. If that assumption hardened into certainty, Daniel would not survive the week. Back at the precinct, Daniel sat alone after Laura stepped out of the room. The silence pressed against him like a weight. He replayed Aaron's final words again and again. "You can't trust," the unfinished warning gnawed at him. Trust who? Laura? The police? Someone else entirely? Daniel leaned back in the chair and stared at the ceiling tiles. Memories surfaced without permission. Aaron teaching him how to ride a bike when they were kids, Aaron standing beside him at their mother's funeral, Aaron laughing during late nights when they dreamed about building a business together. None of those memories aligned with the criminal portrait Laura had presented. Yet the photographs in that folder had looked real. Daniel's thoughts were interrupted when the door opened again. Laura returned, but this time another man entered with her. Tall, expensive suit, silver hair, Mr. Mercer, Laura said. This is Assistant District Attorney Thomas Hale. Hale offered a polite smile that never reached his eyes. I'm very sorry for your loss. Daniel nodded stiffly. Hale sat across from him. Your brother's death intersects with an ongoing federal investigation, he said calmly. If you cooperate with us, we can protect you. Protect me from what? Daniel asked. Hale exchanged a glance with Laura. From the people your brother was working with. Daniel felt something shift inside him. A slow, spreading unease. You're saying Aaron was part of a criminal network? Yes, Hale replied. But we believe he may have been trying to turn informant. Laura added quietly. Which could explain why someone decided to silence him. Daniel's mind raced. If Aaron had been gathering evidence, then the documents he promised to show tonight must still exist somewhere. I didn't receive anything from him, Daniel said. Hale studied him carefully. If you remember anything at all, you contact us immediately. Daniel noticed how carefully Hale emphasized those words, almost as if he expected Daniel to lie. Hours later, Daniel left the precinct and stepped into the cold, early morning air. The rain had finally stopped. The streets were empty, except for the distant rumble of garbage trucks beginning their routes. He walked without direction, his thoughts tangled between grief and suspicion. When he reached his car, he noticed something strange. The passenger door was slightly open. Daniel Fraza. He was certain he had locked it earlier. Slowly, he approached the vehicle. The interior light glowed faintly. On the seat lay a small envelope. No name, no stamp, just his attention demanded by its quiet presence. Daniel looked around the street. No one. He picked up the envelope and opened it carefully. Inside was a single flash drive and a handwritten note in Aaron's messy script. If anything happens to me, don't trust the police. Find Elena. Daniel read the line 3 times. The words seemed to bend the ground beneath his understanding. Aaron had warned him not to trust the police. Yet the police had just offered him protection. A sudden movement at the far end of the street made Daniel glance up. A black sedan rolled slowly past the intersection and then stopped. Its headlights dimmed. Someone inside was watching. Instinct flared through Daniel's chest. He slid into his car and started the engine. The sedan began moving again. Not fast. Just enough to follow. Daniel's pulse hammered as he turned onto the next street. The sedan followed. Every turn he made, it remained 2 cars behind. Whoever was inside wanted him to know he was being watched. Daniel accelerated toward the highway ramp. The city lights streaked across the windshield. He had no idea who Elena was or why Aaron had trusted her. But if the note was real, she might be the only person who could explain what had just begun. Behind him, the black sedan continued its silent pursuit through the waking city. And Daniel understood with growing dread that Aaron's death was not the end of the story. It was the opening move of something far larger, something that had already begun tightening around him like an invisible net. He drove until the city thinned into warehouse districts and half-lit service roads, until the river disappeared behind concrete barriers and stacks of shipping containers, until his own breathing sounded louder than the engine, and still the sedan stayed behind him like a patient thought he could not outrun. Daniel gripped the wheel so hard his knuckles ached. He was not built for this kind of fear. He was a financial consultant, a man who spent most of his days in quiet offices explaining risk in numbers that belonged safely on paper. Yet tonight, risk had a face he could not see, a car without plates close enough to feel, a dead brother cooling in his memory, while a flash drive pressed against his thigh from the pocket of his coat. He took the expressway exit at the last second and cut down a narrow industrial road lined with chain-link fences. The sedan followed, but slower now, cautious. Daniel's phone vibrated in the cup holder. Unknown number. He ignored it. It rang again, then again. On the 4th call, he answered, "What?" His voice came out harsher than he expected. A woman spoke in a low, controlled tone. "If you keep driving in a straight line, they'll box you in at the freight yard ahead." Daniel's chest tightened. "Who is this?" "The person your brother wanted you to find." The line crackled. "Listen carefully. At the next intersection, turn left under the bridge. There's a service tunnel. Your tail is too large to make the turn fast." Daniel glanced in the mirror. The sedan remained 2 lengths behind, lights low and steady. "Elena?" he asked. "You don't have time for certainty, Daniel." She said his name like she had been saying it in her head for hours. Do exactly what I tell you. He should have hung up. He should have distrusted any stranger who appeared from the dark with instructions and answers. But Aaron's note burned in his mind, and some instinct deeper than reason made him turn left beneath the bridge, just as the woman told him. The road narrowed abruptly, dropping into a damp concrete corridor between pillars streaked with rust. Daniel's tires screamed against the wet pavement. In the mirror he saw the black sedan overshoot, brake hard, and skid wide. It vanished from view. He did not stop. Now what? He demanded, into the phone. Keep going until you see a locked gate with blue paint. There will be a keypad box. The code is 1713. Daniel entered the numbers. The gate shuddered open just enough for his car to pass. It closed behind him before the sedan could reappear. He drove into an abandoned loading bay beneath an old customs building where only one overhead lamp still worked. A woman stood waiting beside a dark SUV, her long coat moving in the draft. She looked older than he expected and younger in a different way. Not fragile, not startled, just tired, as if exhaustion had burned away every unnecessary motion. She ended the call and slipped the phone into her pocket. Get out, she said. Daniel stayed where he was. Give me one reason. She stepped closer until the light hit her face. Dark hair pinned back loosely. Sharp eyes. Rain on her cheekbones. Because the men following you are not going to leave until they confirm whether Aaron gave you what he stole. And because if you keep sitting there trying to decide whether I'm lying, both of us will be dead before sunrise. Daniel opened the door. The loading bay smelled of old concrete and river mold. He stood facing her, searching for some trace of his brother in her expression. Who were you to Aaron? Elena held his gaze a second too long before answering. That depends on which year you're asking about. I'm asking about tonight. Tonight I was the person he was supposed to meet before he panicked and called you instead. The answer struck him harder than it should have. Why me? Elena looked past him toward the gate. Because Aaron trusted you more than he trusted himself. Daniel laughed once, bitter and unbelieving. That's convenient. Everyone keeps talking about trust, but no one says what he actually did. Elena's face hardened. He helped build a shipping network that moved contraband through legitimate freight routes. Sometimes cash, sometimes weapons, sometimes people. Daniel felt the floor seem to tilt beneath him. No. Yes. Her voice did not rise. And 6 months ago, he tried to dismantle it. Daniel stared at her. Somewhere outside, tires hissed on wet pavement beyond the gate. Why would he get involved in something like that? Elena folded her arms, less from defensiveness than cold. Because men like Victor Salazar know how to identify weakness. Aaron's company was failing 3 years ago. He had debts he hid from everyone. Investors were leaving. Your father's medical bills were still haunting him. Salazar offered him a lifeline. Quiet shipments. Temporary work. One favor that turned into 20. Daniel's throat tightened at the mention of their father. Aaron had paid those bills after Daniel lost his job during the recession. He had called it a lucky contract, a miracle turnaround. Daniel had believed him because believing had felt kinder than questioning. And you? Daniel asked. What are you in this? Elena's expression shifted. Not softer exactly, but wounded by memory. I audited one of Salazar's companies for the Port Authority. I found irregular manifests. I tried to report them. By the time I understood how high it went, my supervisor was dead, and I was being told the accident report was already signed. Daniel studied her, hearing the weight beneath the calm. So you went to Aaron? No, Elena said. Aaron came to me. He had seen enough by then. People were disappearing. Shipments were no longer just illegal, they were cruel. He wanted out. I told him there was no clean way out. She looked away for the first time. He asked anyway. A long silence settled between them. Daniel took the flash drive from his pocket and held it up. Is this what they're after? Elena nodded. Probably. If it contains what Aaron said it would, then it links Salazar's operation to public officials, prosecutors, customs officers, maybe federal contacts, enough to tear down half the city's respectable faces. Maybe? Daniel said sharply. You don't know? Aaron was careful. He compartmentalized everything. He trusted evidence more than people. A humorless smile touched her mouth. He learned that too late. Daniel thought of Assistant District Attorney Hale, of Laura Kim's steady eyes, of the note in Aaron's handwriting telling him not to trust the police. If this reaches the wrong hands, Elena answered immediately. You die. So do I. Daniel slipped the drive back into his pocket. Then we take it to the press. The press leaks to prosecutors. Then Federal Internal Affairs. One of the names may be federal. Then what do you suggest? His voice rose, sharp with grief. That I stand here and believe my brother was some tragic criminal martyr because you tell me so? Elena took a step toward him. I suggest you stop making this about what version of Aaron makes you most comfortable. The words landed with surgical precision. Daniel's mouth opened and closed. She went on, quieter now. He loved you. That can be true at the same time as everything else. He was frightened, compromised, and guilty. He also spent the last 6 months trying to keep his mistakes from swallowing other people. Those truths do not cancel each other. Daniel looked away because he could not bear how accurate that sounded. The gate rattled suddenly. Both of them froze. A metallic bang echoed through the loading bay. Another followed. Someone testing the lock. Elena moved fast, unlocking the SUV. Daniel hesitated only a fraction before climbing into the passenger seat. She started the engine and killed the single overhead lamp with a switch by the wall as the SUV rolled forward. Darkness swallowed the bay. Outside, a man shouted. Another voice answered. Elena drove through a side exit hidden behind stacked pallets and out into a service alley that ran parallel to the river. Daniel twisted in his seat. Who are they? Not police, she said. Not officially anything. Salazar keeps contractors for when discretion matters. How many? Enough. She accelerated toward downtown. The city was brightening with the gray-blue edge of dawn, but the streets still belonged to people who did not want to be seen. Daniel leaned back and forced himself to think. You said prosecutors. You think Hale is involved. I think Hale is ambitious. Elena kept her eyes on the road. That's often the first ingredient. Laura Kim? Elena was silent for a moment. I don't know. Daniel turned to her. That's not good enough. It's honest. Her jaw tightened. You may find honest less comforting than certainty, but it keeps you alive longer. They crossed into the older part of the city, where brick apartment blocks crowded narrow streets and laundromats glowed beside closed cafes. Elena parked in a basement garage beneath a derelict theater and cut the engine. We stay here until daylight gives us cover. Daniel looked around. This is your safe house? Today it is. She led him up a back stairwell, smelling of damp plaster and dust, into a second-floor dressing room that had been converted into a temporary apartment. A mattress, 2 folding chairs, shelves stacked with files and burner phones. On one wall, an old mirror framed in yellow bulbs reflected their exhausted faces. Daniel stood in the center of the room, suddenly aware of how badly his hands were shaking. Elena noticed and set a kettle on a hot plate. Adrenaline drops fast after fear, she said. Tea helps. He gave her a bleak look. My brother was murdered a few hours ago. Yes, she said, and your body doesn't care. It still thinks survival is chemistry. He sat because his knees had begun to ache. While the kettle heated, Elena pulled down a large city map marked with pins and handwritten notes. Warehouse numbers, container routes, names. Daniel stepped closer. Aaron's handwriting appeared in the margins. Seeing it there almost undid him. He was here, Daniel whispered. Elena nodded. Most nights. Daniel touched the edge of one note. It was absurd how intimate that felt, brushing his fingertips over the pressure of Aaron's pen. Why didn't he tell me? Elena did not answer immediately. When she did, her voice had lost its practical edge. Because shame isolates people long before danger does. Daniel stared at the map. He remembered months of unanswered calls, canceled dinners, Aaron drifting in and out of family conversations with a distracted smile, and a new expensive watch, he said, was a gift from a client. Daniel had resented him for becoming unreachable. He had called him selfish more than once. I thought he was avoiding me, Daniel said. He was. Elena handed him a chipped mug, but not because he didn't care. Daniel let out a dry breath. You loved him. Elena looked at the steam rising between them. I tried not to. That was not the answer of a co-conspirator or an informant. It was worse. It was human. Daniel sat again, mug warming his palms. Tell me about Salazar. Elena remained standing, as if stillness might make her easier to target. Victor Salazar presents himself as a shipping magnate and donor to public housing initiatives. Cameras love him. He sponsors museum wings and scholarships. He also runs cargo through the harbor using falsified humanitarian manifests, medical supplies on paper, weapons and trafficked migrants in reality. He buys cooperation in small doses, a customs inspector's mortgage, a detective's gambling debt, a prosecutor's campaign fund routed through friends. Daniel's stomach turned. And Aaron documented all of it? Some of it. Enough to matter. Elena tapped the flash drive in his coat pocket with her eyes. If it's what he promised, the drive contains transaction records, vessel logs, encrypted correspondence. and one thing Salazar fears more than evidence. What? Names attached to children. Daniel looked up sharply. Elena's face had gone pale in the weak morning light. A refrigerated container arrived 9 weeks ago with 8 undocumented minors inside. 3 died before the truck was opened. Aaron found out the manifest had been signed through a charity shell linked to Salazar's foundation. The room seemed to narrow around Daniel. Jesus. That was when he stopped talking about escape and started talking about confession. Daniel pressed a hand to his mouth. The image hit him with brutal force, not because he could truly picture it, but because he couldn't. Because horror, that deep resisted form. And you still let him keep working? Elena's eyes flashed. I didn't let him do anything. He was not a child. He was in over his head. Yes, she snapped. And so was I, and so are you now. And none of that changes what happened in that container. The silence after her anger was worse than the anger itself. Daniel lowered his hand. I'm sorry. Elena leaned against the table, suddenly looking older. No. You're grieving. Grief makes every question feel like accusation. She rubbed her forehead. I have done enough accusing for both of us. They sat with the weight of that for a while. Outside, traffic began to gather on the avenue. Somewhere below, a metal shutter rolled open. Day had arrived, whether either of them was ready or not. Daniel finally said, We need to know what's on the drive. Elena nodded. Not on a machine connected to anything traceable. She crossed to an old laptop with the camera taped over and no network card installed. Aaron set this up. Daniel watched her insert the drive. Files filled the screen. Folders labeled by dates, vessel IDs, shell companies. A video file marked only with the word June. Elena opened a ledger first. Daniel leaned in as columns of transfers appeared. Millions moved between nonprofits, construction firms, import agencies. One name recurred at the authorization points. T. Hale. Daniel felt the blood drain from his face. So he is involved. Elena clicked another file. Voice transcripts. Meeting notes. Call logs. More names. Some Daniel knew from newspaper headlines. One from a city council fundraiser he had attended last winter. Then Elena opened the video. Grainy footage from a warehouse office. The timestamp read, June 14, 2:11 a.m. Aaron stood partly in frame, camera hidden high on a shelf. He looked thinner, drawn. Across from him sat Victor Salazar, immaculate in a dark suit, and beside him, unmistakably, Assistant District Attorney Thomas Hale. Daniel's breath stopped. Hale was speaking. Contain the doc inquiry before it reaches federal review. Detective Kim is asking questions she doesn't yet understand. Salazar smiled without warmth. Then teach her which questions cost careers. Aaron's recorded voice came from off-camera, strained but controlled. And the container deaths? Salazar turned toward where Aaron must have been standing. You are still making the mistake of confusing tragedy with liability, Aaron. Hale added. The paperwork already attributes fault to subcontracted refrigeration maintenance. Nobody is reopening that file. Daniel stepped back from the laptop, as if it might burn him. Laura Kim, Hale had named her, not as an ally, as a problem. Elena paused the video. That is why Aaron couldn't simply walk into a station house. Daniel's thoughts raced. If Kim was asking questions, maybe she's clean. Maybe. Elena's caution returned instantly. Or maybe she was pushing to increase her value. You cannot build a plan on maybe. Daniel ran both hands over his face. Then what plan do we have? Elena began sorting printed documents into piles with fast, precise motions that barely concealed strain. Redundancy. We copy everything. We create timed releases. We identify one person still outside Salazar's influence. Who? Elena looked at him. That's the question Aaron died trying to answer. Daniel wanted to believe Laura. There had been something in the way she watched him. Not greedy, not rehearsed. But Aaron's note had said not to trust the police, and the video proved at least one prosecutor wanted Detective Kim neutralized. Why didn't Aaron just expose Hale through this video? Daniel asked. Elena's laugh was soft and bitter. Because context is armor. One clip can be called manipulated. One ledger can be dismissed as fabricated. Aaron kept collecting until the pattern could no longer be explained away. She stopped moving papers for the first time. He kept collecting because he was trying to redeem himself through perfection, and perfection is another word for delay. Daniel heard the regret in it, raw and private. You begged him to release it sooner. Elena did not answer, which was answer enough. A burner phone on the table vibrated. Elena glanced at the screen and stiffened. What? Daniel asked. One of our watchers at the harbor. She answered without greeting. Talk. Daniel could hear only a frightened male voice speaking too fast. Elena's face changed by degrees, each word stripping away another layer of control. When? She asked. Who saw? A pause. No. Do not call anyone. Leave now. She ended the call and stared at the dead screen. What happened? Daniel said. Elena looked up. 2 bodies were found in a maintenance trench behind Pier 12. Daniel swallowed hard. Workers? No, she said. The 2 men who followed you. So Salazar cleaned up his own people, or someone else got to them first. Daniel felt the room go colder. Kim? Elena shook her head slowly. Maybe Hale. Maybe Salazar suspected they failed. The problem is not knowing which. Daniel stood and paced the cramped room. This is collapsing too fast. No, Elena said. It's narrowing. There's a difference. He turned on her. That sounds poetic, not useful. Useful is this, she shot back. Once people start killing intermediaries, it means the circle of trust inside the organization is failing. That creates mistakes. And mistakes help us? Mistakes create openings. Daniel stopped pacing. Openings for what? Elena hesitated, and he sensed immediately that she had been holding something back. There is an accounting archive, she said. Not digital, hard ledgers. Salazar keeps them off book because he trusts paper more than servers. Aaron believed they were stored in a records room beneath the old maritime court building. Daniel stared at her. You didn't mention that. Because it was too dangerous. Everything is too dangerous. Yes, Elena said, stepping closer. And I was trying to decide whether you were your brother's next mistake. The honesty of it stung. And now? Daniel asked. Elena's eyes moved to the paused image of Aaron on the laptop screen. Now I think he sent you to me because he knew I would never forgive myself if I let you walk blind into this. Daniel looked at his brother's gaunt face in the frozen video. For the first time that morning, he allowed himself to feel anger at Aaron. Not the simple anger of betrayal, but the deeper kind reserved for people who love you badly. He had dragged Daniel into a war he did not understand, and then died before explaining the rules. You said no clean solutions, Daniel murmured. There aren't, Elena replied. Only trade-offs. He thought of Laura Kim, of Hale's polished condolences, of the dead men at the pier, of children in a sealed container, and Aaron keeping count of sins like numbers might one day balance. Then maybe we stop trying to survive this cleanly, Daniel said. Elena studied him with a mixture of doubt and recognition. That sounds like your brother. No, Daniel said, meeting her gaze. Aaron waited. I'm done waiting. Before Elena could answer, there was a knock on the dressing room door. Not loud, not urgent. 3 measured taps. Both of them went still. Elena reached for the pistol taped beneath the table. Daniel felt his own pulse jump into his throat. Nobody should know this location except her watchers. The knock came again. Then a woman's voice from the other side, controlled and unmistakable. Daniel Mercer. If you are in there, I need you to understand that Thomas Hale just signed a warrant that will put every uniformed officer in this district on the street, looking for you, and if Elena Vargas is with you, she has less than 30 seconds to decide whether she wants to shoot through that door or find out why I came alone. Daniel looked at Elena. Elena looked at the door. Neither of them moved, and the terrible thing was that Laura Kim's voice sounded exactly like truth. Daniel mouthed the name without sound, as if speaking it too loudly might turn the moment into a trap more solid than the wood between them. Elena kept the pistol low but ready, her finger resting along the guard instead of the trigger. That choice, more than anything, told Daniel she had not yet decided whether Laura Kim was an ally or a corpse delayed by caution. How did she find us? He whispered. Elena's gaze never left the door. Either she tracked you from the precinct, tracked the car, or one of my watchers is compromised. Laura spoke again, closer now, but still with the restraint of someone who understood that fear had its own hearing. Hale is moving fast because somebody at the harbor turned up dead. He's putting those bodies on you, Daniel. If you don't open this door, the next people here won't knock. Daniel felt the logic of that settle into him with ugly clarity. He looked at Elena. If Hale wants me framed, she could be telling the truth for the wrong reason. Or lying for the right tone, Elena said. The pistol rose a fraction. Daniel hated that there was no clean way to measure a human voice against survival. Let me talk to her, he said. Elena's jaw flexed. If she's not alone, you die first. That's comforting. It's practical. Daniel stepped toward the door before he could talk himself out of it. Laura, he said through the wood, if you came alone, put your badge on the floor and slide it under the door. 3 seconds passed. Then metal scraped against the old boards. Daniel crouched and picked up the badge wallet. It was real. That did not prove enough. Still, Laura had surrendered the one symbol she had no reason to part with, unless she understood he needed to see risk from her side too. Elena nodded once, sharp and reluctant. Daniel unlatched the door and pulled it open only halfway. Laura stood in the dim hallway wearing plain clothes under a damp coat, no visible weapon in her hands, no backup crowding the stairwell behind her. Her face was pale with lack of sleep, but her eyes were alert in the hard, disciplined way of someone operating on urgency rather than panic. She glanced past Daniel and saw Elena with the pistol. Her expression changed by a degree, not surprise exactly, more like confirmation of a suspicion. "Good," Laura said quietly. "At least that means Aaron reached somebody before he died." Elena did not lower the gun. "That depends on whether he was wrong about you." Laura looked from Elena to Daniel. "He wasn't sure about me. That's why he never fully committed. Smart of him." Daniel stepped back to let her in, though every nerve in him objected. The dressing room felt suddenly smaller with all three of them inside. Laura shut the door behind her and set a paper file on the table. "Hale filed a probable cause affidavit 26 minutes ago," she said. "According to the report, witnesses placed Daniel at the pier with his brother. 2 contract security men were found murdered nearby, and Daniel fled lawful questioning while in possession of financial records tied to smuggling accounts." Daniel stared at her. "He moved that fast?" "He was prepared," Laura said, "which means your brother's death didn't catch him off guard the way it should have." Elena's voice came flat and cold. "You expect us to believe you came here out of civic loyalty?" Laura met her stare. "No. I expect you to believe I'm here because Hale just crossed a line that tells me I'm either next or already finished." Daniel watched the 2 women size each other up with the weary precision of people accustomed to betrayal. Laura noticed the laptop screen and the paused warehouse video frame. Her eyes sharpened instantly. "You have evidence." "We have questions," Elena said. "Start with how you found us." Laura pulled a cheap key fob from her coat pocket and set it beside the file. The sedan that followed Daniel used a private frequency tag on the undercarriage to coordinate visual tails. "Old tactic. Your people should have swept for it." Elena's face hardened. Laura continued. "I found the signal when traffic cams picked up Daniel's route and then lost him under the bridge. That narrowed the possible exits. This theater was the only building within range with power usage spikes in an otherwise dead property." Elena gave a humorless smile. "You're either very good or very rehearsed." "Both," Laura said. "That's how you survive inside a rotten system." Daniel picked up the affidavit file. Hale's name was there, signed with calm authority. The language painted Daniel as volatile, grief-stricken, financially entangled with Aaron's operations, possibly violent. Every sentence was plausible enough to hurt. "He built this before Aaron even died," Daniel murmured. Laura nodded once. "He needed a contingency. Either Aaron delivered the archive and Daniel became the retrieval point, or Aaron failed, and Daniel became the graveyard where everything stops." Elena watched Laura with a predator's stillness. "You were mentioned in the video." That landed. Laura's eyes flickered toward the laptop. "Let me guess." Hale said, "I was asking questions." Daniel saw something like vindication and pain move across her face at once. "You knew," he said. "Not enough," Laura answered, "but enough to make people nervous. I was reviewing a container death file that got buried under maintenance liability. The signatures didn't line up. Aaron's name surfaced in a subcontractor routing memo, then vanished in the corrected version." Elena lowered the pistol slightly, though not completely. "And you told no one?" Laura gave her a thin look. "Who exactly would you recommend? My lieutenant, whose brother-in-law works for Salazar's legal team? Internal Affairs, who lose paperwork every election cycle? Hale supervises half the prosecutorial referrals tied to port crime." She opened her coat and slowly removed a folded envelope from an inside pocket. "I made copies. Quietly. I was waiting until I knew who else was clean." Daniel almost laughed at the cruelty of the symmetry. Everyone waiting. Everyone preserving the perfect moment while bodies accumulated around the edges of caution. "My brother died because all of you kept waiting for certainty," he said. Silence followed, because no one could dismiss it. Laura looked at him with a kind of hard respect. "Yes," she said. "That's true." Elena finally set the pistol on the table, still within reach. "Then stop waiting now. Tell us exactly what Hale can do in the next 12 hours. Laura moved into work mode as if guilt had only made her sharper. "He can freeze Daniel's accounts, circulate his photo statewide, and lean on every patrol officer to treat him as unstable and potentially armed. He can also push search warrants on known Mercer properties, which means your family house, Aaron's office, and Daniel's apartment." Daniel's thoughts jumped immediately to his mother's old townhouse, now mostly empty except for boxed photographs and furniture. Neither brother had the heart to sell. "There's nothing there," he said. Laura shook her head. "If Hale thinks Aaron hit a redundancy cache, He'll tear through every sentimental location first. Elena's eyes narrowed. Aaron did keep one non-digital fallback. Daniel turned toward her. What? A deposit box key, she said. He mentioned it once during an argument. Said if I ever stopped trusting him entirely, there was one place the truth could survive both of us. Daniel felt anger rise so quickly it almost relieved him. You didn't think to mention this earlier? He never told me the bank. Elena snapped back. Only that the key existed, and that he kept it somewhere personal, somewhere I'd never think to look, because I spent too much time hunting systems and not enough time understanding sentiment. Laura looked between them. Somewhere personal means family. Daniel was already thinking ahead, digging through memory. Aaron had never worn much jewelry. He hated clutter in his pockets. He kept almost nothing in his office, except expensive pens and old invoices. Could the key be on his body? He asked. Laura shook her head. The morgue chain is already compromised if Hale wants it compromised. Anything on Aaron when he died is gone or cataloged beyond your reach. Elena moved to the map wall and began pulling pins. Then we stop chasing only what Aaron left and start using what Hale fears now. Laura's gaze sharpened. Meaning? Elena tapped the paused frame on the laptop. This video gets copied and seeded to 4 locations. Not released, seeded. Then we go after the paper ledgers in the maritime court basement. Daniel stared at her. All 3 of us? Unless one of you prefers being arrested or shot separately, Elena said. Laura folded her arms. The old court building is under redevelopment lockdown. Private security, camera grids, motion sensors in the records level. Can you bypass the official side? Elena asked. Laura almost smiled. Officially, no. For the first time since entering the room, something like shared momentum flickered among them. Not trust exactly, but the temporary alignment that forms when fear acquires a direction. Daniel watched them begin to trade details, access codes, shift changes, blind corridors, and felt his own role thinning into silence. He was the least trained person in the room, the civilian, the grieving brother pulled into mechanisms already in motion. The realization stung more than he expected. Aaron had always moved first in a crisis when they were young. Aaron talking to cops after their father smashed a neighbor's mailbox drunk. Aaron bargaining with landlords, doctors, debt collectors. Daniel handled aftermath. Aaron handled impact. And now Aaron was gone, and Daniel could feel how badly he had been trained for other people's damage. Laura noticed him receding. Daniel, she said, not unkindly. What are we missing? He looked up. Elena and Laura both turned toward him. It irritated him that the question should feel generous. You're both building this, like Hale and Salazar are still on the same page, he said. What if they're not? Elena frowned. Explain. Daniel moved to the table, seeing the puzzle not as crime or law, but as leverage and incentives. If the 2 men at the pier were killed after they lost me, that sends one message. But if they were killed because they saw something they weren't supposed to, that sends another. Either way, somebody is compressing the chain. Hale needs this contained legally. Salazar needs it contained operationally. Those priorities overlap until panic starts. Then they split. Laura's expression changed from polite patience to concentration. Go on. Daniel pointed to the affidavit. Hale rushed this. Too fast. That means he's afraid evidence is already outside his control. Salazar, if he thinks Hale is getting desperate, won't trust him to protect the operation. He'll start insulating himself. Separate communications. Separate handlers. Maybe even move assets. Elena's eyes lit with reluctant approval. A power split. Exactly, Daniel said. Which means the records room matters, yes. But only if the ledgers are still there. If Salazar suspects internal fracture, he may move the paper first, Laura added. Or send someone to burn it. Daniel nodded. So don't just sneak in, force their timing. The room quieted around the idea. Elena tilted her head. How? Daniel looked at the city map, the shipping pins, the known routes. By making each of them think the other has already betrayed him. Laura exhaled slowly. That's not a small move. Neither is framing me for triple murder. Daniel met her gaze. Can you get a message to Hale without it tracing back to us? Laura thought for a beat. Maybe. If I use an old confidential informant channel he thinks belongs to one of his own intermediaries. Elena caught on quickly. And I can make one of Salazar's dock captains hear that Hale is preparing to negotiate immunity using accounting records from the court archive. Daniel felt the current in the room change, not hope. Hope was too soft. This was more dangerous. A strategy shaped like a knife. Laura spoke first. If each man believes the other may grab the ledgers tonight, they move early. Elena finished the thought. And in the rush, they expose who actually controls the archive. Daniel said. Then we follow the movement, instead of guessing at shadows. Laura looked at him for a long moment. Your brother must have hated how good you'd be at this, once he ran out of choices. Daniel almost said something cruel in reply, but the words dissolved before they formed. Instead he asked, what did you know about Aaron personally? Laura seemed surprised by the shift. Not much. Try. She leaned against the mirror table, thinking, he asked careful questions. The kind guilty men ask when they want the answer to absolve them before they act on it. He once called in an anonymous tip and stayed on the line after the useful part was over, just to ask whether certain witness protection promises were ever real. Daniel swallowed. What did you tell him? Laura's face softened in spite of herself. I told him real promises are rare, real effort is not. Elena looked away. Daniel could picture it too easily now. Aaron alone in a parked car with a burner phone, trying to bargain with morality in installments. The image made his anger feel suddenly indistinguishable from grief. Laura checked the time. We need to move. If I'm absent from the task force meeting much longer, Hale will know I'm off book. Elena gathered the copies and split them into waterproof folders. Then we divide. Daniel and I plant the rumor for Salazar. You go back and feed Hale. Laura nodded, then paused. One more thing. If we do this, there's no coming back to ordinary procedure. No warrants, no safe chain. No institution catches us if we fall. There was never going to be ordinary procedure, Elena said. Not after the children in that container. Laura held her gaze, and for the first time the space between them looked less like hostility than recognition between people who had reached outrage by different roads. They left separately through different exits, regrouping an hour later in a crowded public market near the river, where anonymity came disguised as routine. The morning had fully opened by then. Vendors shouted over crates of fish and citrus. Delivery scooters weaved past old women bargaining over herbs. Daniel walked between Elena and Laura, carrying an empty produce bag to look like he belonged there. The ordinariness of the place pressed painfully against the unreality of the last few hours. A child laughed somewhere near a flower stall. A man cursed at a broken espresso machine. The world had not paused for Aaron's death. It never did. Elena peeled off near the loading side, where dock workers came for late breakfasts and cheap cigarettes. She approached a thick-necked man in a Harbor Union jacket and spoke to him for less than 20 seconds, her face composed into something almost bored. Daniel never heard the words. He only saw the man's expression change from indifference to startled caution. Laura, meanwhile, disappeared into a pharmacy and emerged several minutes later after using a pay terminal hidden near the back. When she rejoined Daniel, she said only, Hale got the message. And? Daniel asked. If he believes it, he'll hide his fear by acting bigger than usual. Daniel gave a grim half-smile. So basically the man will continue being himself. They waited. 42 minutes later, the first sign came. 3 black SUVs sped toward the courthouse district, ignoring morning congestion with the entitlement of men used to being waved through. Elena watched them pass from behind a newspaper stand. Salazar's private security, she said. Too many for simple retrieval. Laura's burner phone buzzed almost immediately after. She checked the message, and her mouth tightened. Hale just redirected a tactical warrant team to the same block under a fabricated narcotics lead. Daniel felt the city around him sharpen into pieces. They're both moving. Elena already had her keys in hand. Then we go now. The old Maritime Court building stood near the riverfront redevelopment zone, half wrapped in scaffolding, its limestone facade scarred by neglect and ambitious money. Years ago, the place had processed shipping disputes and customs fraud. Now developers planned to turn it into luxury offices with preserved historical detail, as if polished stone could erase the kinds of decisions once made inside. Daniel crouched in the back seat of Elena's SUV as she parked in a service alley 1 block over. Laura stripped off her coat and replaced it with a reflective safety vest taken from the trunk. Construction supervisors don't get questioned if they walk fast and look annoyed, she said. Elena handed Daniel a hard hat. Can you follow instructions without improvising? Probably, he said. That's the least reassuring answer available. They entered through a side gate where Laura flashed a forged authorization tag just long enough for the sleepy subcontracted guard to avoid reading it properly. Inside, the building smelled of plaster dust, wet stone, and old paperwork disturbed after years of stillness. Corridors were stripped to their bones, plastic sheeting snapped in the cross-draft from broken windows. Somewhere above, drills screamed intermittently. Laura led them down a service stairwell toward the basement. If Salazar's team came through the front, they'll head for the archive room from the main corridor. Tactical unit will secure perimeter, not understanding what they're actually protecting. Elena moved lightly, despite the tension in her shoulders. And us? Laura answered without turning. We use the flood tunnel access behind the boiler room. Daniel nearly laughed from disbelief. There's a flood tunnel. Every old river building has one, Laura said. Corruption loves drainage. They reached the basement landing just as voices echoed from the adjacent hall. Men. Several. Not close enough to see, but close enough that intent carried in the clipped pattern of orders. Elena pulled Daniel into the shadow behind a support pillar. Laura risked a glance and whispered, "Private security. 4 minimum." Another voice answered from farther off, amplified by the corridor geometry. "Police. Too late to retreat. Too dangerous to be found between both groups." Elena pointed to a rusted maintenance hatch half concealed by stacked drywall. Laura nodded. Together, they dragged it open. A stale rush of cold air rose from the narrow passage below. "Ladies first?" Daniel whispered, and Elena actually almost smiled before shoving him toward the ladder. He descended into darkness, thick with moisture and mineral smell. The passage at the bottom was barely shoulder wide, curving beneath the foundation toward a chamber where old valve wheels rusted beside modern cable conduits. Laura dropped down behind him. Then Elena sealed the hatch above, cutting off the sounds of the building into a muffled pressure. "Left," Laura said. "Archive should be beyond the retaining wall." They moved by flashlight. Water dripped steadily somewhere ahead, each drop marking time too slowly. Daniel's mind kept flashing to Aaron in places like this, carrying evidence through tunnels and corridors, while pretending normal life above ground still meant something. He wondered how long a person could live, divided between shame and purpose, before the split became permanent. At the end of the passage, they found a bricked service opening, half demolished by renovation work. Through the gap beyond, Daniel could see the archive room, rows of metal shelving and banker boxes under emergency lights. He could also see 2 men already inside, one in tactical black, one in a tailored dark coat. Not Salazar, not Hale, someone older, with white hair and a cane, though the way he stood made the cane seem optional rather than necessary. Elena went utterly still. "Who is that?" Daniel breathed. Laura's face drained of color. "Judge Brennan." Daniel looked between them. The name rang dimly from civic banquets and charity galas, a retired federal judge praised as incorruptible, now a public ethics lecturer and board member on 3 foundations. Elena whispered, "He sits on Salazar's housing trust," Laura added, voice barely audible, "and he mentored Hale." The older man in the archive room rested one hand on a ledger box and said to the tactical officer, "You will tell Mr. Hale the records were destroyed in structural collapse if he asks, and if Mr. Salazar asks, you will tell him. The court retained nothing of value after digitization." The officer hesitated. Brennan's expression did not change. "I am offering you the last clean lie you will ever receive. Take it." Daniel felt the floor of everything shift under him. Hale and Salazar were not the top of it. They were ambitious instruments inside a structure older and colder than either of them. Elena's hand found his sleeve in the dark, gripping once, hard. Not for comfort. For warning. Because in that instant all 3 of them understood the same terrible thing at once. Aaron had not died trying to expose a criminal network that infected the city. He had died trying to expose the people who taught the city how to call infection governance. For a suspended second, Daniel forgot the cold of the tunnel and the danger above them, and felt only the sickening rearrangement of scale, the way grief changes shape when it learns it has been standing in the shallow end of a much deeper darkness. Brennan's voice carried lightly through the gap in the broken brick, cultivated and almost gentle, the voice of a man who had spent decades making ruthless instructions sound like sober necessity. "The city survives because somebody decides which truths are too expensive," he said. The tactical officer nodded with the rigid obedience of a man who had already sold too much of himself to hesitate now. Another figure entered the archive room from the far doorway, breathing harder than the others, coat unbuttoned, irritation flashing before discipline smoothed it away. Thomas Hale. He crossed to Brennan with an urgency that stopped just short of disrespect. "You weren't supposed to come in person," he said. Brennan turned his head. "And yet here I am, because your recent decisions suggest a weakening sense of proportion." Hale's jaw tightened. Aaron Mercer was destabilizing the chain. "Aaron Mercer was frightened," Brennan said. "There is a difference, though I grant that frightened men are often untidy." Daniel saw Laura go absolutely still beside him. Whatever private calculus had kept her hope alive regarding how high the rot reached had just been annihilated. Hale glanced toward the ledger boxes. "Salazar's people are already in the building." "I know," Brennan replied, "which is why you should not have escalated with a homicide affidavit before the archive was secure." Hale's voice dropped. "I needed pressure on the brother." Daniel felt Elena's grip on his sleeve tighten again. Brennan examined Hale with almost paternal disappointment. "Need is a childish word in governance. Anticipation is preferable." He tapped the nearest box with the head of his cane. How much did Aaron duplicate? Hale hesitated. Unclear. We recovered fragments from his office, some encrypted drives. His apartment yielded nothing. And the brother? Still moving. Detective Kim interfered. At that, Brennan's expression shifted for the first time, not dramatically, but enough. He turned toward the tactical officer. Add Detective Kim to the cleanup list if her loyalties cannot be corrected. Laura inhaled once, soundlessly, and Daniel understood that whatever fragile thread had connected her to procedure, rank, the years she had spent believing institutions could be forced back toward honor, had just burned through. Elena leaned close to Daniel's ear. We cannot stay here. Her whisper barely existed. If Brennan leaves with those ledgers, the rest becomes theater. Daniel forced himself to keep watching. He needed to know more, needed at least one piece of this nightmare he could hold in language. Brennan was saying, Salazar has become emotional. That makes him inefficient. If he believes you are securing immunity independently, he may overreact. Hale gave a dry laugh. That rumor came from somewhere. Then let him chase shadows, Brennan said. Men like Salazar mistake noise for leverage. And if Mercer already distributed the video? Hale asked. Brennan's mouth thinned. Then we discredit. Then we mourn publicly. Then we rebuild the committees and task forces under cleaner branding. Do not confuse scandal with collapse, Thomas. Cities forget faster than blood dries. Daniel felt nausea rise. Not because the statement was shocking, but because it sounded practiced. A principle tested and proven enough times to become a philosophy. Elena touched Laura's wrist now, a signal. Laura shook her head once, eyes fixed on the room beyond. Daniel understood before either woman spoke. Laura wanted Brennan heard, documented, not merely exposed through ledgers, but captured in his own words. Elena whispered, No electronics. The tunnel scrambles signal. Laura pointed to a loose ventilation duct above the gap. An old acoustic grill, partly corroded, ran from the tunnel wall into the archive ceiling. Daniel saw the thought forming across all three of them at once. If they could widen the passage just enough, maybe a phone placed near the grill would catch clean audio. The problem was time. Brennan had already begun issuing instructions to the officer regarding removal routes and fire suppression override. Elena studied the mortar seams and quietly set down her flashlight. From a pocket, she withdrew a slim pry tool and a folded cloth. You carried that into a courthouse? Daniel mouthed. I carried it into my 20s, she mouthed back. The answer would have felt almost absurd in any other moment. Laura took over lookout through the gap while Elena worked at the softened edge of brick with slow, excruciating precision. Each tiny crumble of mortar sounded catastrophic in Daniel's nerves, though no one in the archive seemed to hear. Hale was arguing now, impatience creeping through his control. I can still close the Mercer problem at street level. Give me 6 hours. Brennan regarded him coolly. Your difficulty, Thomas, is that you still believe pressure and strategy are the same thing. If Daniel Mercer has the archive, he is no longer a street-level problem. He is a succession problem. He determines which of your generation remains useful after this. Hale absorbed that with visible resentment. Daniel filed away the phrasing. Succession. Generation. This was not a loose conspiracy, but an inheritance system. Elena finally loosened enough brick to create a narrow opening beside the grill. Laura slid her phone through and angled the mic downward. No network, no transmission, just local recording. Daniel stared at the tiny red icon trembling on the screen. A small, desperate machine trying to collect proof against a structure built to outlive proof. Brennan continued. Salazar can be replaced. Charismatic criminals always think they are foundational. They are not. They are interfaces. Hale glanced toward the far door. He won't go quietly. He does not need to go quietly, Brennan said. He needs to go usefully. The words landed with immediate implication. Daniel saw it strike Laura too. Salazar was already being converted from partner to scapegoat. Not eventually. Now, Hale asked. And Aaron? Brennan's gaze drifted to nothing for a moment, as if Aaron Mercer were already dissolving into the category of regrettable logistics. Aaron wanted absolution without relinquishing authorship. The combination is tiresome. Daniel's hand curled into a fist so tight his nails bit skin. Rage came over him hot and startling, nearly blinding in its purity. Aaron had done unforgivable things. Daniel knew that now. But hearing this man reduce him to an inconvenience, hearing his brother spoken of not as a human being who had panicked and tried and failed and bled out on a dock, but as a badly managed variable, made violence feel terrifyingly simple. Elena must have sensed it. Without looking at him, she laid 2 fingers flat against the back of his wrist until the impulse passed enough to survive it. In the archive room, a sharp burst of static crackled from someone's radio, followed by a terse voice. Movement on sub-level east. Possibly construction crew. Hale swore under his breath. Brennan barely reacted. Your theater has become crowded, he said. Resolve it. Hale gestured to the tactical officer, and 2 more men entered from the corridor beyond, weapons low but ready. Laura snatched the phone back through the gap. Elena whispered, "Tunnel. Now." They retreated in darkness, just as footsteps pounded somewhere beyond the archive wall. Daniel moved with the stunned obedience of prey. The passage seemed narrower on the way back, the air more stale, the blackness thicker, because now it contained pursuit. Behind them, metal slammed. Voices echoed. Someone had found the disturbed maintenance hatch or the half-demolished opening. Laura led at speed, one hand on the wall, the other holding the phone tight against her chest. There's another exit, she breathed. Pump room to loading alley. How far? Daniel whispered. Far enough to hate it. The tunnel bent sharply and opened into a larger chamber, where flood pumps the size of vans slept under draped chains and decades of rust. A low security light glowed near the far wall. Elena stopped dead and raised an arm. Ahead, through the bars of a service gate, 2 silhouettes crossed the corridor beyond. Not searching yet, guarding. Laura cursed softly. They sealed the alley exit. Daniel's mind raced. The chamber vibrated faintly with distant machinery from upper levels. Water ran beneath the grates underfoot. Brennan's people on one side, Salazar's on another, police likely feeding into both by accident or design. There would be no clean retreat through routes already known. He turned slowly, taking in the room. Old pump systems, valve wheels, pressure gauges, emergency flood controls. Aaron used to drag him through abandoned places as teenagers, daring him into roofs and basements and derelict train platforms. Aaron loved systems, loved maps, maintenance diagrams, the hidden organs of buildings. Corruption loves drainage, Laura had said. So did flood control. Can these pumps still run? Daniel asked. Laura blinked. In theory. For storm surge. Basement corridors locked down automatically. Fire doors. Pressure barriers. Daniel nodded. Including archive access? If the redevelopment contractor didn't disable the old protocols, Laura said. That's a gamble. Daniel stepped to the control panel crusted with dust and retrofit switches. Everything is. Elena moved beside him, scanning labels. Main surge override. Auxiliary gate close. Pump manual prime. Her finger hovered over a red protected switch. If we seal the sublevel, Brennan's trapped with whoever's inside, Laura added. And every security force in the building starts fighting blind over egress and command. Daniel heard the danger plainly. What happens to us? Laura gave him a grim look. We better already be moving. Above them, footsteps reverberated through iron. Elena flipped the protective cover. On your call. Daniel hesitated only because the choice felt larger than mechanics. Once he did this, there would be no illusion left that he was merely surviving other people's decisions. He would be making one that could get people killed, including people whose guilt he had not measured perfectly. But then, Aaron's blood was back in his memory, and the container children Elena described, and Brennan saying, cities forget faster than blood dries. Daniel pressed the override. The effect was immediate and monstrous. Somewhere deep below, pumps roared awake like buried engines. Warning bells exploded through the chamber. Heavy doors began slamming in sequence above and beyond, each concussion shuddering through the floor. The silhouettes beyond the gate shouted in alarm. Laura grabbed Daniel's arm and pulled him toward a narrow maintenance ladder, rising into darkness behind the pump housings. Up, now. They climbed into a vertical shaft while the building transformed around them. Red lights strobed. Air pressure changed with each ceiling barrier. A siren voice began repeating evacuation commands distorted by age and bad speakers. Elena came up last, slamming the hatch behind her just as gunfire cracked somewhere below. Then again from farther off, sharper and more chaotic. They're shooting at each other already, she said. The shaft emerged into a disused records annex on the first floor, where plastic-wrapped furniture and court benches sat abandoned under drop cloths. Dust shimmered in the red emergency light. Laura bent over, hands on knees, then straightened and checked the recording on her phone. Her expression tightened. We got Brennan. Not everything, but enough. Names. Orders. The succession line. Elena listened to the muffled turmoil below. Not enough for conviction. Enough for fracture, Laura said. Enough to make every rat in the structure start wondering who gets offered first. Daniel looked toward the shuttered windows. Outside, sirens were beginning to converge for real now. The public kind. The visible kind. If Brennan is trapped, he said, he'll find a protected exit. Laura nodded. Judges like him always do. They moved through the annex into a long hallway lined with portraits of former maritime justices. Old white men in oils watched them pass with composed certainty, as if institutional memory itself were an audience to the ruin below. Halfway down the corridor, Elena stopped in front of one portrait and laughed once under her breath. "What?" Daniel asked. She pointed to the brass plaque. Edmund Hale, Thomas Hale's father. Former maritime court justice. Daniel felt the connections harden. It really is inheritance. Laura looked at the portrait, then at the phone in her hand. That's why Brennan used the word succession. She turned toward Daniel. Your brother didn't just stumble into organized crime. He stumbled into the city's shadow apprenticeship. Daniel thought of every gala donation, every newspaper profile, every speech about reform after some public scandal broke. The machinery of outrage had always seemed theatrical. Now he understood why. Scandal was not the failure of the system. It was one of its maintenance functions. Voices sounded from the stairwell ahead. They ducked into a side chamber that had once been a judge's robing room. Through the narrow gap of the partly shut door, Daniel saw two men in private security black rush past. One bleeding from the shoulder, both shouting about the old man and federal exposure. Salazar's crew was splintering already. Laura whispered, "This building is a fuse box." Elena moved to the room's interior wall, where a panel had been opened for renovation. Behind it ran a crawlspace toward the adjacent chambers. "We can reach the west courtyard from here." Daniel peered into the dark slot. "I'm beginning to miss normal doors." "Normal doors are where the gunmen are," Elena replied. They crawled through insulation and old plaster dust until the passage opened above a ceremonial staircase overlooking the west foyer. Below, chaos had spread upward. Uniformed police were trying to establish control while private contractors in unmarked jackets claimed legal authority. No one trusted anyone long enough to coordinate. In the center of the foyer stood Victor Salazar himself, immaculate despite the disorder, flanked by two bodyguards and arguing with a captain from Tactical Response. Daniel had expected a brute. Instead, Salazar looked like a man built for campaign posters. Silver at the temples. Handsome in a studied and expensive way. His anger restrained by vanity. Even from above, Daniel could sense the charisma Elena had described, the kind that turns entitlement into magnetism and makes other people misread appetite as leadership. Salazar was saying, "Judge Brennan authorized my access personally." The captain answered, "Then Judge Brennan can explain that when we find him, but until then, this site is under emergency seal." Salazar's smile never touched his eyes. "Captain, emergency seal is a phrase for television. What's below this building belongs to people who pay for your department's equipment." Daniel felt Laura stiffen beside him. "There," she whispered. "That's the city speaking in its native language." Elena's gaze was fixed not on Salazar, but on one of his bodyguards, a broad man with a scar at the temple. "Ramos," she whispered, and something bleak passed over her face. "He was Aaron's handler at the beginning." Daniel looked at her. "You know him." "I know what Aaron became around him." Her voice went flatter. "Careful, Ramos doesn't miss." The captain's radio crackled. He lifted a hand to his ear. In that tiny, distracted moment, Salazar's expression changed. The charm vanished. He looked past the police line toward the sub-level doors and understood something. Maybe that Brennan was trapped. Maybe that Hale was moving separately. Whatever he realized, it hollowed his face and left only calculation. "We're leaving," he told Ramos. "Now." He turned before the captain could object. If Salazar got out, Daniel knew, the next stage would be disappearance, asset transfer, a public fugitive narrative tailored to absorb the whole scandal and protect everyone above him. Elena understood it too. "We cannot let him vanish," she said. Laura's answer came immediate and brutal. "We cannot arrest him either. Not here. Not with half this building bought." Daniel looked from one to the other, then back to the foyer. "Then we make him afraid to leave empty-handed." Elena turned sharply. "Meaning?" Daniel saw it with sudden clarity. A convergence of everything Aaron had taught him accidentally. Men like Salazar did not run only from threat. They ran toward leverage. "He thinks the ledgers are still in play," Daniel said, "and he still doesn't know who has the archive. If we make him believe Aaron left a final handoff with someone he thinks he can control, he'll break pattern." Laura frowned. "Who could he think he can control?" Daniel answered before fully deciding to. "Me." Both women spoke at once. "No." He kept his eyes on Salazar below. "He knows my face now. Hale put me in motion publicly. If Salazar thinks I'm panicking and trying to trade evidence for protection, he'll want the meeting before Brennan or Hale can bury him." Elena grabbed his arm and pulled him back from the ledge. That is exactly how your brother got trapped into every terrible decision after the first one. Maybe, Daniel said. But Aaron tried to buy time. I'm trying to take it away. Laura was already shaking her head. Too exposed. Too emotional. Salazar will smell uncertainty. Daniel met her gaze. Then give me certainty. That silenced her. For a moment all three of them just breathed the same dusty air while the building below shook with shouted orders and distant sirens. Daniel lowered his voice. You both keep treating me like collateral you can protect if you're careful enough. That's over. Brennan just made me a succession problem. Salazar is about to become a scapegoat. Hale is somewhere deciding which side of the burn line he can survive on. If we keep reacting, we stay inside their timing. Elena's eyes flashed with anger that was not entirely disagreement. And if you go to Salazar, you give them your pulse directly. Then don't let me go unguarded, Daniel said. Laura studied him with the evaluating stare of a detective and the reluctant empathy of a woman who had seen civilians mistake rage for readiness. You are not ready for a direct meet, she said. Daniel held her stare. Neither was Aaron the first time. And look how well protecting me from that worked out. The cruelty of the statement hung there. Laura absorbed it. Elena looked as though she might slap him or hold him, or both. Instead, she stepped away, put both hands on the dusty windowsill, and stared down into the courtyard where police cars were now arriving in earnest. When she spoke, her voice was low and scraped raw. Aaron's first meeting with Salazar was in a parking garage under the old Civic Center. He practiced his confident face in the mirror for 10 minutes before getting out of the car. Daniel said nothing. Elena continued, eyes still on the courtyard. He told me that later because he thought it was funny by then. He said fear becomes ridiculous once you survive it. She turned back. But fear is not ridiculous, Daniel. Fear is information. Aaron stopped listening to it because shame made him confuse endurance with courage. Daniel saw then that her anger at him was braided tightly with grief for Aaron, and that every hard practical thing she had said since they met had been built over a crater she was refusing to look into. Laura seemed to see it too. Softer now, she said. If we use Daniel, it has to be on our terms, with exits and misdirection. No heroic improvisation. Elena gave a single reluctant nod. Daniel exhaled, not because he had won, but because the decision now felt shared enough to carry. Laura checked the recording again, then her watch. We need air, distance, and a clean place to think. Salazar's exit team is moving west. We can shadow them from the roof transfer bridge. They withdrew from the crawlspace and climbed another level through an unfinished service core until they reached an exterior bridge connecting the court building to a neighboring annex under renovation. From there, the city spread around them in cold afternoon light. Cranes over the river, sirens below, glass towers reflecting a sky too clear for the day's contents. Salazar's convoy pulled away from the west curb under police protest that had more performance than resistance in it. Laura photographed plates. Elena memorized faces. Daniel watched the black vehicles merge into traffic and felt an unfamiliar sensation settle under his grief. Not resolution, not purpose exactly, something harsher, a willingness to let the next choice damage him, if that damage bought exposure for the people who thought damage belonged only to others. Laura's burner phone buzzed again. She read the message and swore. Hale just issued a regional alert, claiming Daniel was sighted fleeing the courthouse during an armed exchange. Elena laughed without humor. He's making you the spectacle before anyone else can define it, Daniel said. Then we define it first. Laura looked up. With what? We don't have a safe broadcaster. Daniel nodded toward her phone. Not yet, but we have Brennan's voice, Hale's name, and a city full of ambitious people who would knife each other for a promotion if they smelled blood above them. Elena's expression sharpened. You don't go after the system by appealing to its conscience. You go after its appetite, Daniel finished. Laura stared at him for a second, then slowly smiled in spite of the disaster around them. Your brother would have hated how quickly you learn. Daniel looked out over the river, where the harbor cranes stood like skeletons in the distance. My brother taught me, he said. He did not say which lessons had been given deliberately and which had been extracted from ruin. He did not need to. Elena stepped beside him, shoulder almost touching his. Below them, the city kept moving, commuters and sirens and contracts and lies. Somewhere in that movement, Brennan was adjusting. Hale was maneuvering. Salazar was calculating whether fear or vanity should guide his next call. And for the first time since Aaron died on the dock, Daniel felt the story shifting away from the dead brother's unfinished confession and toward the living burden he had left behind. Not redemption, never that, but inheritance in its ugliest form, the passing down not of safety or wisdom, but of unfinished moral debt. The plan took shape not in one clean decision, but in fragments stolen between movement. because that was how people under pressure built futures, by fastening one dangerous thought to another until momentum resembled conviction. Laura led them off the bridge and through the annex stairwell, into a deserted print room where contractors had left blueprints rolled in cracked tubes across metal tables. She spread a sheet over the dust and drew the city in blunt strokes with a carpenter's pencil. Not because any of them needed a map of streets they already knew, but because drawing made possibility visible. "Salazar will not run yet," she said. "Not fully. Brennan being exposed changes the order. If Salazar thinks he has become disposable, he will need insurance before he vanishes." Elena stood across from her, coat open now, hair slipping loose, one hand braced on the table. Insurance means leverage. Leverage means he reaches for the one variable not yet priced in public, Daniel said. Me. Neither woman liked hearing it stated plainly, but both of them accepted it because truth had narrowed until they could no longer afford politeness around risk. Laura looked at him. "If we bait him, we control channel, place, time, and exit. We do not let him improvise the environment. He won't agree to anything too controlled," Elena said. "He'll want an advantage he can feel." Daniel thought of the man in the foyer, how quickly the charm had dropped when pressure changed, how vanity and fear seemed to be competing for the same space in him. Then we offer him something he values more than caution, not just the archive, proof that Brennan and Hale are already choosing who lives through this. Laura's pencil stopped. "The recording." Elena nodded slowly. "Not the whole thing. A slice. Enough to show succession language, enough to make Salazar hear his replacement being discussed." Daniel watched the idea land. Salazar might endure legal threat. He might even endure scandal if he believed the architecture above him still required his usefulness. But hearing that he had already been converted into useful loss would touch the one panic men like him never learned to hide. "We send him a clip," Daniel said, "and tell him I want terms." Laura corrected him. "Not terms. Fear. You don't sound like a negotiator. You sound like a man with no institution left to believe in." "That won't be difficult," Daniel said. The words came out dry, but the truth inside them felt heavy. Just hours ago, he had still been thinking in categories like innocence, procedure, rescue. Aaron's death had broken those first. Brennan's voice had shattered what remained. He could feel the transformation happening in him with unsettling clarity, not into someone harder exactly, but into someone less surprised by the mathematics of harm. He hated how useful that felt. Elena began making calls on burners, layering channels the way someone threads wire through a bomb. One message to a dock captain she knew would sell information upward, another to a fixer who owed Aaron money and feared Salazar enough to answer quickly. Laura stripped metadata from the audio and cut a 15-second excerpt. Brennan's voice, cool and unmistakable. "Salazar can be replaced. Charismatic criminals always think they are foundational. They are not. They are interfaces." Even hearing the clip once made the room feel colder. Daniel imagined Salazar listening to it alone, inside a dark car, hearing the polished contempt of the class that had always intended to outlive him, and knew the clip would do more than frighten him. It would humiliate him. Humiliation moved men faster than danger. "Where do we meet him?" Daniel asked. Elena said, "Somewhere symbolic enough to insult him, and public enough to limit open gunfire." Laura gave a humorless smile. "You say that like this city doesn't specialize in public gunfire followed by private explanations." Daniel's mind went unexpectedly to the old Civic Center parking garage Elena had mentioned, the place where Aaron first practiced his confident face in the mirror before walking into corruption, as if he were choosing it rather than being recruited by his own desperation. The image would not leave him. "The Civic Center garage," he said. Elena looked up sharply. "No. That's where Aaron first met Salazar." "Exactly." Daniel held her gaze. "If Salazar knows that place mattered, he'll hear what I'm actually saying. Not just that I have evidence. That I know I'm standing in my brother's outline, and I'm angry enough to burn it." Elena's expression closed. "Do not romanticize this. I'm not." Daniel surprised himself with how steady he sounded. "I'm weaponizing sentiment. That's what everyone else has been doing all day." Laura watched the exchange with the tired alertness of someone triangulating not just strategy, but emotional blast radius. "The garage is under city offices, and half the cameras are dead from budget neglect," she said. "Good for ambiguity. Bad for survival." Elena looked away, then back. "There's a lower service tier with 2 vehicle exits and 1 maintenance stair to the records annex. Aaron used to park there because the ticket machine never worked." The sentence came out more personal than tactical, and Daniel saw pain flicker in her face before control covered it. He wanted to ask how many nights she had waited for Aaron in places like that, how many times she had watched him descend into rooms full of men he said he could manage. but there was no room now for tenderness that did not serve motion. By dusk, they had shifted locations twice, shed the construction vests, changed cars, and duplicated the surviving evidence again onto encrypted cards hidden in places that felt absurdly domestic, beneath a spare tire, inside a pharmacy tampon box, taped behind the framed backing of a thrift store painting. Daniel did each task carefully, almost ceremonially. He had spent years believing adulthood meant competence in the visible world, taxes paid, bills managed, grief handled quietly. Now competence looked like making sure the truth could survive your body by refusing to keep it all in one place. Laura finally sent the message at 7:12 p.m. through a chain designed to seem messy enough to be real. The clip, a single line beneath it from an account that could plausibly be Daniel's if Salazar wanted to believe it. Your turn to learn how replaceable you are. Civic Center P3. Come alone if you still think you control what Aaron died for. Elena read the line, then looked at Daniel. Too much, Aaron. That's the point. No, she said. The point is to sound wounded, not theatrical, Laura said. He's right about one thing. Salazar will hear the personal note as authenticity. Men like him don't believe ordinary people become dangerous unless grief gives them permission. Daniel said nothing. He knew they were both partly right. He was performing a version of himself now, but then again, grief had already made performance unavoidable. There was the Daniel who had sat in precinct light, insisting his brother was innocent. There was the Daniel who now understood innocence had never been the right category. Somewhere in between stood a man about to invite his brother's killer into a place soaked with older choices. As they waited for response in the rented room above a closed travel agency, Laura dozed for 14 minutes in a chair, with her hand still near the pistol under her coat. Elena did not sleep at all. She stood by the window, watching the cross street darken, and Daniel watched her in profile and thought how strange it was that crisis makes intimacy possible in crude, fast forms. He knew almost nothing about her life beyond this fire, and yet he knew the particular way she held silence when she was frightened, not empty but taut, as if language might give the fear edges. You can still say no, she said without turning. To what? To becoming the face of this part. Daniel leaned back against the desk. Was Aaron the face of the first part? Elena closed her eyes briefly. Aaron was the wound in the wall. He made openings. He also made a mess of everyone who loved him. The honesty was brutal, but not unkind. Daniel asked, Did he love you badly too? She gave a small laugh that carried no amusement. He loved like a man who thought confession counted as repair. Daniel let that sit between them. It was the cruelest accurate sentence he had heard all day. And you stayed. Not always. She turned then, finally facing him. That's the part grief edits out first. The parts where we left. The parts where we failed to stop what we understood. Daniel thought of all the missed dinners, the ignored calls, the resentment he had carried with such righteousness when Aaron withdrew. I wasn't exactly patient with him either. Elena's face softened by a fraction. No one loves people well while they are becoming someone hard to recognize. Laura's burner vibrated on the desk, breaking the moment. She was awake instantly, reading before the sleep could fully leave her eyes. He responded. Daniel felt his pulse lift. What did he say? Laura held up the screen. 3 words. Bring all copies. Elena exhaled. He's coming, Laura added, or sending Ramos to test the ground first. Daniel stepped to the sink and ran cold water over his hands for no reason, except that he needed sensation tied to the present. The water carried the smell of old pipes. In the mirror above the sink, his face looked older than it had that morning. Not by years, by revelations. He remembered Aaron at 17, bloody lip after a fight outside school, grinning despite it and saying, You always look like the future owes you an apology. Daniel had laughed then. Now he wondered whether Aaron had envied that softness, because he already sensed it would not last. They left in 2 vehicles. Laura rode ahead in a utility van with surveillance gear scavenged from an evidence locker she no longer intended to explain. Elena drove Daniel in the SUV at a measured pace through evening traffic where office workers were heading home and tourists clustered under string lights near the plaza. The normalcy felt almost insulting, but Daniel understood now that this was how cities protected themselves psychologically. They split knowledge into zones. Scandal somewhere, dinner here, children on scooters, men drafting affidavits that bury bodies, music drifting out of bars. No one can hold the entire shape of a city at once without breaking. The Civic Center garage rose from beneath a brutalist government block like a concrete thought too ugly to demolish. Closed offices above, municipal seals on the entrances, security cameras that probably worked only when politically convenient. Elena parked 2 levels up from the meeting point. Laura's van slipped in from the east ramp and disappeared. Over comms, she said, I have sightlines on both vehicle approaches and the service stair. 2 exits remain clear. If it becomes chaos, you move north, not back toward the lift. Daniel adjusted the wire in his ear. Understood. Elena touched his sleeve before they exited the SUV. If Salazar offers you something that sounds like mercy, remember that it is only hierarchy in a kinder accent. Daniel looked at her. You think I still need that reminder? Her expression flickered. No, I think I need to hear myself say it. They descended on foot to P3. The garage smelled of engine oil, wet concrete, and the faint metallic memory of old rainwater. Half the fluorescent strips were dead. Their footsteps echoed in long, pale lanes between pillars painted with peeling numbers. Daniel recognized the place immediately, despite not having been there in years. He and Aaron used to cut through here after baseball games downtown when they were boys, pretending the pillars were sentries in some fortress they had to cross without being seen. Later, when they were old enough to hate each other in adult patterns, they still parked here once after a funeral and sat in Aaron's car for 40 minutes without speaking because grief had made them children again, and neither knew how to drive home. Position, Laura whispered in his ear from somewhere above. No visual yet. Elena guided Daniel to a pillar near a burned-out payment kiosk. You stand here. You do not close distance unless we tell you. And you? Shadow line. She moved into the darkness between parked municipal sedans, nearly disappearing. Daniel was suddenly alone in the lane with the hum of old electricity and his own breathing. He slipped one hand into his coat pocket around an empty flash drive case prepared for theater and tried to slow his pulse enough that his face would not betray too much. Time stretched. Every headlight glow from the upper levels looked like an arrival. Every drip sounded like a step. Then an engine descended the ramp with unhurried confidence. Black sedan. No plates visible from the front. It rolled into the lane and stopped 30 feet away. Ramos stepped out first, broad shoulders, scar at the temple, eyes scanning with professional boredom that Daniel recognized instantly as lethal discipline. The rear door opened. Victor Salazar emerged in a dark coat, no visible weapon, though only fools would take that at face value. Even under garage lights, he looked composed, almost elegant, as if entering a charity gala instead of a possible execution. He took in Daniel, the empty lane, the dead kiosk. You look more like your mother than Aaron ever did, Salazar said. Daniel had prepared for threats, bargaining, contempt. The personal opening almost unnerved him more. You knew my mother? No. Salazar's smile was slight. But I know how brothers divide a family face. He did not move closer. Where are the copies? Daniel forced himself to match the stillness. Safe. Then you are here to negotiate. No, Daniel said. I'm here because the men above you have already started subtracting. Salazar's smile faded. You think a clipped recording makes you informed. I think Brennan called you an interface. For the first time, Salazar's composure slipped enough to reveal injury under the polish. It was small, but real. Ramos shifted his weight. Salazar said, And you think that offends me? Daniel looked directly at him. I think it tells me Aaron was never really working for you. He was working inside a caste system you mistook yourself for joining. Something flashed in Salazar's eyes then. Not mere anger. Something older and more intimate, as if Daniel had accidentally put his finger on the one humiliation Salazar spent his entire career translating into power. Careful, Salazar said softly. Men who inherit legitimacy often confuse it with intelligence. Men denied it learn hunger. Hunger tends to outperform. Daniel almost believed him in that moment. That was Salazar's gift. The ability to make predation sound like earned clarity. But Daniel remembered Brennan's voice, and the children in the container, and Aaron trying to confess through perfection. Is that what you told yourself when you started moving kids in refrigerated boxes? He asked. Salazar's face went still. Ramos took one step forward. Laura's voice cut into Daniel's ear. Tight. Hold. Ramos has a shoulder rig. No second visual yet. Salazar raised a hand slightly, and Ramos stopped. The garage seemed to constrict around the silence that followed. When Salazar spoke again, the charm was gone. You think you know what happened in that container because your brother cried over it in a file. You don't know the chain that created it. Then tell me, Daniel said. Salazar tilted his head. Why? So you can choose the version of truth that hurts the right dead people? He took one step closer. Aaron was useful because guilt made him diligent. You are not your brother. I haven't decided whether that makes you weaker or more expensive. Elena's voice came quietly through the comm, barely audible. Stall him 10 seconds. Unknown movement west ramp. Daniel kept his eyes on Salazar. Aaron made recordings. I know. He named Brennan. Hale. Others. I know. Daniel, let a beat pass. Then why are you here? Salazar's answer came instantly. Because men like Brennan do not understand the first rule of contamination. Once you decide someone is beneath you, you stop seeing how much of yourself you already left in their blood. The words hit Daniel harder than he expected, because, for a second, Salazar sounded less like a criminal cornered than a man standing at the edge of betrayal and finally willing to describe the structure that produced him. It would have been easier if he sounded monstrous in a simple way. Instead, he sounded lucid. Dangerous and lucid. Laura cut in, urgent now. Third vehicle entering West Ramp. Possible Hale team. We are out of time. Daniel made the choice without fully planning it. Then listen carefully, he said to Salazar. Brennan is not trying to protect you. He's trying to close over you. If I disappear tonight, the recording goes wider and you still die alone. If I walk out, maybe you get one chance to force daylight on the people who taught you to call yourself necessary. Elena hissed in his ear. Too far. But Salazar had heard something in it. Daniel saw the calculation sharpen. Salazar asked, "What do you want?" The honest answer rose before strategy could flatten it. "I want Aaron's death to stop being useful to the men who caused it." Salazar looked at him for a long time. Then headlights washed the far wall. Another vehicle descending fast. Ramos turned immediately, hand going toward his rig. Salazar didn't look away from Daniel. "That," he said almost sadly, "is not a negotiator's demand." Gunfire cracked from the ramp before anyone could move again. Laura shouted, "Contact. Multiple. Down." The garage detonated into motion. Ramos drew and shoved Salazar sideways behind a pillar, just as bullets sparked off concrete where he had been standing. Elena fired from the shadow line. Daniel dropped behind the dead payment kiosk as glass burst somewhere above, and alarms began shrieking through the structure. Men shouted names Daniel couldn't place. Tires screeched. He caught one glimpse of Laura on the upper lip of the lane, crouched behind a low barrier and firing downward toward figures rushing from the new arrival vehicle. Hale's voice echoed suddenly from somewhere beyond the pillars, raw and furious, stripped of all courtroom smoothness. "Take Mercer alive. Salazar is expendable." The words seemed to freeze the entire space for a fraction. Salazar heard them too. Daniel saw his face in the strobing alarm light, and in that face, humiliation, rage, and understanding fused into something irreversible. In that single instant, the hierarchy beneath all the speeches and donations and procedural language stripped itself bare. And Daniel saw the truth not as evidence or theory, but as instinctive alignment. Who was protected, who was offered up, who was meant to disappear, carrying everyone else's sins like ballast. Salazar moved first, not away from the gunfire, but toward it. He stepped out from cover with a speed that shocked even Ramos and shouted, "Thomas," in a voice that cracked across the garage louder than the alarms. Hale turned reflexively toward the sound. That was all Ramos needed. 2 shots, controlled, fast. One struck the pillar near Hale's head. The second tore through the windshield of the vehicle beside him, showering his men in glass and forcing them down. Elena used the brake to cross the lane in a low sprint and slam into Daniel behind the kiosk. "Move," she snapped. "North exit, now." Daniel started to rise, but Salazar was already speaking again, not to Daniel this time, not even really to Hale, but to the whole garage, as if public declaration could still alter the shape of betrayal. "You don't get to write me as debris," he shouted. "Not after all these years." Gunfire answered him. Ramos fired back. Laura, still above them on the lip of the lane, yelled, "Police inbound from street level. Minutes at best." Daniel caught sight of Hale ducking behind an SUV, blood on his temple from broken glass. His face twisted not with fear but outrage, the outrage of a man unaccustomed to hearing his private expendability spoken aloud. "Kill Salazar," Hale shouted. "Mercer comes with me." Elena dragged Daniel toward the shadow of the stair core while concrete dust burst from the wall behind them. Ramos moved like a shield around Salazar, but Salazar no longer seemed interested in escape alone. He kept advancing in short, violent bursts, returning fire. Not like a polished benefactor now, but like a man finally forced back into the crude labor that power had temporarily let him subcontract. Daniel realized then that Salazar's vanity had not made him soft. It had only made him theatrical. Beneath it remained someone who had climbed through worse rooms than this one. They reached the stair door. Laura appeared above, descending backward while firing one-handed to cover them. "Go," she said. "I'll seal the door." But before any of them could move through, another figure staggered from between 2 municipal vans near the south pillar. Thomas Hale, alone for the first time, weapon drawn, suit jacket hanging open, his expression lit by the pulsing alarm into something feral. He had lost his men in the confusion or sent them elsewhere. It no longer mattered. He aimed at Daniel. "You should have stayed in the interview room," he said. Daniel froze, not from obedience, but from the uncanny intimacy of hearing the day's entire collapse condensed into such a bureaucratic sentence. Hale took one step closer. "Do you understand what your brother actually did?" he demanded. "He made the mistake of thinking guilt gave him moral rank. It doesn't. It just makes people messy." Laura leveled her pistol at Hale. "Drop it." Hale laughed once, breathless and ragged. "You still think this ends with commands, Laura?" Elena shifted to flank him. But Salazar saw Hale too. Daniel watched recognition pass across Salazar's face like a verdict. All charm gone. All negotiation burned away. "There you are," Salazar said. The words were almost gentle. Hale pivoted toward the new threat, and that tiny division of attention broke whatever final geometry of control had been keeping everyone alive. Shots overlapped. Daniel heard 3, maybe 4. Felt Elena shove him down hard. When the noise cleared into ringing silence, Ramos was on one knee clutching his side. Hale was against the pillar, with a spreading red bloom beneath his ribs, and Salazar stood very still in the center lane with his gun lowered, staring at Hale, as if the reality of wounding him had arrived before the meaning of it. Hale slid to the floor. He looked not frightened now, but astonished, like someone who had finally encountered consequence in an unabstracted form and found it vulgar. Laura crossed the distance first, kicked Hale's weapon away, and pressed 2 fingers to his neck. "Still alive," she said. Salazar let out a short breath that might have been relief or disappointment. Elena trained her pistol on him immediately. "Don't." Salazar looked at her, then at Daniel. "This is the part where you tell yourself the city changes because the right men started bleeding in visible places," he said. Daniel stepped forward before either woman could stop him. "No," he answered. "This is the part where I stop caring whether it changes cleanly." Salazar studied him with a tired, almost mournful curiosity. "That's the first honest thing I've heard all night." Sirens swelled outside, louder now, closer, layered with the metallic slam of opening barriers at street level. Laura's phone buzzed in her pocket. She ignored it. Hale coughed wetly and tried to push himself up. Laura shoved him back down with one hand. "Stay still unless you want to drown faster." Hale looked past her to Daniel. Blood touched the corner of his mouth when he spoke. "You think Brennan will fall for this?" Daniel knelt just far enough away to keep out of reach. "I think Brennan loses his favorite trick if enough people hear his own voice before he gets to name the scandal." Laura finally pulled her phone free, opened the recording app, and without asking anyone's permission, hit the upload command she had been saving. Not to one newsroom, not to one contact. To every secure channel she had created over years of mistrust, judges, reporters, federal auditors, opposition staffers, civil plaintiffs' attorneys, the kinds of people who hated one another enough to prevent any single hand from catching the whole truth and closing over it. The progress bar crawled. Hale saw it, and something like real fear entered him at last. "You idiot," he whispered to Laura. "You don't know where that lands." Laura looked down at him. "Exactly." Elena never lowered her weapon from Salazar. Ramos, pale and bleeding, gave his employer a look Daniel could not fully read. Loyalty, perhaps, but also exhaustion. The exhaustion of a man who had spent too long surviving somebody else's myth. Salazar glanced at Ramos, then back at Daniel. "If I walk out and talk," he said, "they will bury me before dawn." "Probably," Daniel said. "But if you run, they bury you as the monster who acted alone." Salazar smiled faintly, despite the gun still aimed at him. "You did learn quickly." Daniel thought of Aaron practicing his confident face in a mirror before the first ascent. Of Aaron on the dock, trying to warn him with blood in his lungs. Of all the versions of his brother he would have to live with now. The loving one, the compromised one, the cowardly one, the brave one. None of them canceling the others. "No," Daniel said quietly. "I learned slowly. You all just ran out of time." Above them, over the garage intercom, a distorted voice ordered everyone to disarm and remain in place. More vehicles screeched in. Doors slammed. The moment thinned. Every choice from here on would become record, testimony, distortion, spin. Salazar seemed to know that too. He looked once toward the ramp, once toward Hale bleeding on the concrete, and then he made the strangest choice of the night. He dropped his pistol, not tossed aside in surrender, not theatrically flung. Simply let go of it as if he were tired of carrying the last object in a chain that had finally reached his own throat. Ramos closed his eyes briefly, then did the same. Elena exhaled, but kept her aim steady. Laura rose, badge in one hand now, weapon in the other, and shouted toward the approaching officers. "Detective Laura Kim, shots fired, multiple corrupt actors, body cams on before anyone touches the scene." It was a command and a prayer both. Uniformed officers flooded the level, some confused, some frightened, some clearly already calculating which names mattered most. Laura moved first to Hale, loudly identifying him, loudly noting his weapon, loudly preserving the script before someone else could write it. Elena stepped back from Salazar just enough to avoid looking like execution. Daniel stood in the center of it all and felt almost nothing for a moment. Not relief, not triumph. Only depletion so complete it resembled silence. Then his phone buzzed in his pocket. A number he did not know. A text with no greeting. The judge has left the city. The message was unsigned. Daniel stared at the screen and understood that endings were only ever local phenomena. Brennan had slipped the frame. The architecture had not collapsed. It had merely lost one wall in public. Laura saw his face and knew at once the night had not closed cleanly. "What is it?" she asked. Daniel showed her the text. She read it, then looked up at the chaos around them. The officers, the medics arriving for Hale and Ramos. Salazar standing unhandcuffed for one impossible second before procedure finally caught up. "Then we got the right level of truth," she said. "Not enough to feel safe, enough to make hiding expensive." Elena came to Daniel's side. Her voice, when she spoke, was low and frayed. Aaron would have called that a start. Daniel slipped the phone back into his pocket. He looked across the garage at the dark stain where Hale's blood had spread, and thought of the harbor water carrying Aaron's blood toward the sea before dawn had even broken. Aaron called too many unfinished things progress, he said. Elena's mouth tightened, not in disagreement, but in recognition of how grief sharpens after action, rather than easing. Outside, news vans were already arriving, drawn by scanner traffic and civic instinct. Cameras would feast, committees would form. Brennan would deny. Allies would fracture. Names would vanish from websites by morning. Others would be added. Some families would finally hear why certain cases died in paperwork. Others would never know what private bargains had been made around the names of their dead. There would be no clean ledger for any of it. Yet as officers moved in, and medics bent over men who had spent years moving pain outward, Daniel felt the burden shift without lightening. Aaron had not been redeemed by dying. Daniel had not been purified by surviving. Elena would not become less haunted because Salazar chose handcuffs over flight. Laura would not recover the naive part of herself that once believed honest procedure eventually forced itself upward. But the silence had been broken in a place that mattered. Broken publicly. Broken before the right men could agree on a replacement story. Sometimes, that was all history allowed. Not justice, just interruption. Laura touched Daniel's shoulder once before turning back to the scene she would now have to fight to preserve. Elena remained beside him, close enough that grief could move between them without needing to be named. Daniel looked at the ramp where night air spilled in above the rotating emergency lights, and he understood with exhausted clarity that he would carry Aaron forward, not as absolution, not as a tragic hero to rescue from complexity, but as a warning, written in blood and love together, a man who had tried too late and still mattered, a brother whose final gift was not innocence, but evidence, not peace, but responsibility. And when the officers finally moved to escort him upstairs into the noise of cameras and shouted questions and a city beginning, belatedly, to hear its own buried voice, Daniel went without resisting, because for the first time since the gunshot at the harbor, he was no longer being dragged towards someone else's version of the truth. He was carrying his brother's unfinished damage into daylight, knowing daylight would not heal it, only expose who had profited from the dark.